Hi, welcome to my home office. My name is Lisa Novitsky, and I'm glad to be here and to be doing this class with you. I wish we could be together in person so that you could ask me questions in real time, but at the end of the webinar, I'm going to give you information so that you can communicate with me directly. So again, my name is Lisa Novitsky, and I am a professional photographer. I've had a business since 2012, and I'm going to share with you a brief amount of my history with photography. I've loved photos my whole life. I've taken them my whole life. I love putting those photos into albums, and I continue to pore over the albums that were created when I was a kid. I love looking at pictures of other people, but I didn't get involved in really learning about photography until my daughter was born, and I became interested in taking photos that I would feel like I could put up on my walls and blow up. And so I started reading books and looking at YouTube videos, and then I started to take some online classes and in-person classes and practice and practice and practice, and eventually invest in equipment. And just fast forward from that point to the fact that there were people who liked the work that I was doing and pointing me in the direction of turning it into a business for myself. And that's what I did, and I love it. And I'm excited to share with you a bit of this information today. And even though it's going to be quick, I hope that it will inspire you to get out and practice and try some of the tips and some of the ideas that you get. All right, so let's get started. So here's what we're going to cover today. I am going to talk to you about how to take better photos with whatever camera that you have, but initially I am going to talk to you about the types of digital cameras, because this is a question that I get all the time about what kind of camera should I get. And honestly, this just depends on your budget and what it is you want to do, the kinds of photos you want to make. So we'll go over some of those types and some of the cons, pros and cons of each of them. I'm going to talk to you about how your digital sensor works. I mean, don't worry, it's not going to be a major technical information here, but just to give you an idea of how they work, and talk a little bit about megapixels and how you apply that knowledge, some exposure basics, talk briefly about white balance, basic in-camera settings, and then we get to what makes a good photo. And I'm primarily going to talk about light and composition, and then I'll have some final thoughts and suggestions at the end of the class. So the types of digital cameras, we have compact, bridge, mirrorless, DSLR, and of course the camera that you find on your smartphone. So here is the compact camera. It's also known as a point and shoot camera. It's got a fixed lens, automatic shooting mode, it's lightweight and compact, and it has an LCD screen on the back for composition. These are just some of the major features of this camera. Some of the pros of this camera are the fact that it is lightweight and compact. You can put that in your pocket. You can put it in your bag. It does have these automatic shooting modes, which are perfect for beginners. Some of the cons of this particular camera are that because it's small and compact, it's got these tiny little buttons that can be a little fiddly, and also it's got a smaller sensor inside of it compared to the DSLR or the mirrorless camera, and so that's going to have a direct impact on the size of prints you're able to produce from this camera. The bridge camera also has a fixed lens, but this fixed lens often has a longer and larger zoom capacity than the compact camera does. It's similar to the DSLR, but it is often more lightweight and smaller. It often has advanced manual controls in addition to the automated modes. And they often have a built-in viewfinder. Now, some of the pros of this camera are that it's a pretty great all-around camera. The zoom range, as I stated, is longer. You have more manual control with this camera. It does have a more compact sensor. Again, this has a more compact sensor, so it does fall short of the DSLR and mirrorless standards. And the lenses are not interchangeable. The mirrorless camera has interchangeable lenses, advanced manual controls. It's lighter and more compact than the DSLR. It has an electronic viewfinder, and I'll tell you what that means in just a minute. It works without an internal mirror, thus the name, and it has a big sensor. So this electronic viewfinder, one of the advantages of that is that in good light, this electronic viewfinder, when you look through it, it's going to give you a pretty clear indication of the actual exposure of the image that you're making, the actual exposure of the image that you're making, and the composition. That's not always true in a DSLR because of the way that the way that the image is produced to you through the viewfinder. You're going to have to rely on your knowledge of the settings and that you've properly exposed it that way. So this is, I would say, actually one of the advantages of a mirrorless camera over a DSLR. And I'll talk to you about a couple of those things after I show you the DSLR. Now, that's a pro of the mirrorless camera. It's quieter than a DSLR. It does have these interchangeable lenses, and that is I would say it's a pro, but it's also a con in that it doesn't have as many lenses and accessories available to you at this point. And one of the things that used to be a con about the mirrorless camera is that when you were trying to track with autofocus a moving subject, it didn't do that as quickly, but that technology is catching up and changing. So the DSLR has interchangeable lenses. It has advanced controls that you can view on a screen here. It has manual settings and an optical viewfinder. An optical viewfinder means that the light it's coming directly to your eye, but it is bouncing off a mirror and through prisms for you to see that image. So it has that internal reflex mirror, and it has a big sensor. There's a lot of when you want a camera that has these interchangeable lenses and you're trying to decide between mirrorless and DSLR, I would encourage you to, there's many articles out there on this, and I would just encourage you to do a little more educating yourself around this to decide which one is better for you. They both have a lot of great features, and I guess it really is depending on what you want to do. If you're interested in shooting more video with your camera, many people prefer the mirrorless. But you know, a lot of people really like the heft and the weight that a DSLR has. It really is, with these two, they both produce fantastic images. A girlfriend of mine, who is also a professional photographer, has moved to, I would say she at least has 2 mirrorless cameras now. And one of the reasons was she injured her shoulder, her arm, and wanted to keep working, and needed a lighter weight camera that still packed the same punch. And so she invested in a mirrorless camera, and she absolutely adores it. I still shoot with the DSLR. I do tend to like the heft and the weight of it, how it feels in my hands when I'm using it. I would encourage you to, if you're going to make this type of investment in a camera, that you go to a camera counter and you hold each of them and get a feel for what that feels like. And that the DSLR does have more lenses available to you at this point, more accessories. Some people really like that. So the camera in your smartphone. I think the pros and cons are obvious here, but we'll talk a little bit about them. Almost all of us have a smartphone with a camera in it. I mean, that's one of the pros. It's highly accessible, and you're able to take that photo, edit it right there in your phone with certain apps, and load that right up into social media. So that's a great plus. Although there are some cameras with Bluetooth capabilities that you can upload straight to the internet as well. You know, the con is that that sensor in that camera can't be all that big. So you are limited to the print you would be able to produce from a smartphone. Although I have to say that the latest smartphones, I know the average in the latest is like, I want to say around 12 megapixels. I think there are some that have a few more than that. And with those megapixels, you can produce a very good quality 8x10, 8x12 photograph, which is our print. And that's incredible. That's amazing. So how the digital sensor works. Your sensor surface is made up of photosites, and that the light is captured in these, and it's measured for intensity and color. And let me show you the next slide here. So in this illustration, these gray squares represent photosites, and how it captures those lights is that it moves through this filter. So in most cameras, the filter sort of looks like this. The light passes through this multicolored filter, and it creates a basic color value at each point of this. And at each photo site, it reads, it can tell how much of that color is coming through. So it can tell how much red and green and blue are coming through. So, and it takes a reading of the color and intensity. And when it does that, it creates a mosaic. So then another algorithm comes into place, and what that does is a demosaicing. And how it does that is it reads all of the sites around itself to create an image that, you know, is what you see at the end of it. Your camera makes a pretty amazing educated guess as to at the end to create the pixels that make up your digital image. Now, a pixel are the little squares of info in your digital photo, and they're arranged in rows and columns. I don't know if you've ever zoomed in to a digital photo and you began to see those pixels get larger and larger. They're arranged in columns and rows. And so a megapixel, I know you've heard that term before, is 1 million pixels. And why that's important, or what that might mean to you, is this. Megapixels have to do with what size print you can make that has great detail in it. So how can I put this? The numbers along the top of this chart are print dimensions in inches at 300 ppi, or pixels per inch. And most books and magazines and professional prints require a 300 ppi, or pixels per inch quality. So I'll blow this up so you can see. What that means is that if you have 3 megapixels available to you, you can create a 5x7 image that at 300 ppi that has really good, really great detail up close. So with your smartphones that have the 12 megapixels, look at this, you can create an 8x10 photograph. That's going to have a a lot of great detail in it. And so when you move up and you have your larger sensors in your professional grade cameras, you're going to move into being able to blow up and create a bigger print or canvas or whatever that is. So next, let's talk about exposure. This is just an image I put up here just to illustrate what overexposed, correctly exposed, and underexposed look like. There are 3 elements that go into good exposure. Let me go back. The correct or good exposure occurs when you are maintaining as much detail in as possible in the highlights, so the lighter parts of your photograph, and the darker or shadows of your photograph. And there are 3 factors that determine what will influence the exposure. And these 3 things are often represented in a triangle because they impact each other. If you change one, you have to change the others to create exposure, a balanced exposure. ISO refers to the sensitivity of the sensor to light. The greater your ISO, the less light you need to properly expose your image. And this is important because choosing an appropriate ISO will give you the ability to shoot at several different settings and still maintain a properly exposed file. In short, it not only gives you the ability to shoot in a variety of lighting situations from bright to dark, but it gives you the ability to make creative choices in your other settings. So let's take the compact camera for instance, where ISO comes into play on a compact camera is those smaller cameras in low light don't do as well as, say, a camera that's able to bump its ISO up way high and still maintain a lot of detail. See, what happens when you bump your ISO up often in a camera is that you get that kind of that grainy look about it, which actually can be a creative choice. I often like that look and will bump up ISO and allow that grain to come through. It's kind of old-timey looking. You can do that certainly for creative purposes. So this is just an illustration. I would imagine that this photo was not taken while the sun was brightly shining out, because at ISO 100, you have a pretty dark image here, and as you bump that ISO up to ISO 1600 here, it's letting in more light and you're able to see the scene. So I'm going to talk about Aperture next, and before I do that, I want to show you a YouTube video from the channel Minute Physics. The video is entitled "How to See Without Glasses," and I think you're going to see the correlation when I show it to you. So I'm gonna have to stop.
Vision is arguably the most compelling human sense. Words and stories and sounds allow us to imagine strange beasts and far-off worlds, but seeing makes us truly believe they exist. And that's why we place so much effort into correcting the optics of our eyes when they don't work, whether with glasses or contact lenses or surgery. But if you're in a pinch, bleary-eyed, or missing your glasses, there's a simple trick that will allow you to see clearly. Just make a tiny, tiny hole using your fingers, look through it, and the world will become clear again. This works no matter how blurry your vision is. Take off your glasses and give it a try. Amazing, right? But to explain this wizardry, we just need to remember how seeing works. Light travels outwards from a source, bounces off of objects in its path, travels into your eye and onto your retina, where it forms an image. If your eye had no lens, light from a single source would hit your retina in lots of places and result in a smeared out mess, which is exactly what happens when I take the lens off of my camera. A lens focuses that spread out light, corralling it into a crisp image on your retina. And after a little excitation of light-sensitive nerves and interpretation from your brain, you see. But wait, when we look at an object, the background and foreground are usually blurry, because a lens can only focus light coming from one distance away. If an object is too near or too far, its light will again be spread out on your retina, leaving you with a blur. Fortunately, muscles in our eyes allow us to accommodate by squeezing the lens, which changes its focal length so we can see at different distances. except when we can't, or when our lenses become damaged, in which case we need glasses. Unlike a lens, a pinhole or other small opening can focus light coming from any distance. Because it's such a small opening, it only allows light to come through in one place, and thus in only one direction from any particular source. So there's no blur, and everything is in focus. If you're familiar with photography, this is why using smaller and smaller apertures makes everything in your photo come into focus. Of course, small openings like pinholes and camera apertures create crisp images by blocking rather than focusing light, so the images are much darker, which is a major reason why we use lenses rather than pinholes for glasses, telescopes, and eyes. And yet, in a pinch, looking through a tiny hole made with your fingers can help you see. Now, do you see why?
I just think that's a really cool video. Yeah. So aperture. An aperture is defined as a hole or opening through which light is emitted. And inside the camera lens is a system of blades which open and close to increase or decrease the opening through which light passes into the camera. I'm sure if you've looked into a lens, you've seen that happening in the camera. It's often referred to as an f-stop, if you've heard that term. And this is represented in this format, f1.8 or f5.6. Those are two examples. A smaller number means a wider opening and is referred to as a larger value. So this is a little counterintuitive. So a larger aperture of 2.0 is represented by a smaller number, but it means that the opening is wider. And a small aperture is represented by a larger number. So the wider the lens is open, the larger aperture value, the more light gets in, and there's an example, you can use a faster shutter speed if that's the case. So here's an example of how that might look, that wide open aperture, and how it shuts down as you get into the higher numbers. Also, there are some lenses that can stop down to like 1.2. It's just not shown here on this graph. And the wider open lenses, what this has to do with is depth of field. I'm going to get into that. A wide aperture, or so the smaller number, will give you a shallow depth of field. And this can be used to isolate a subject. So depth of field refers to the range in an image that occurs when objects appear acceptably sharp or in focus. So in other words, when you focus your camera on an object, that object will be in focus. And the depth of field refers to the amount of space either in front of or behind your in focus object that also appears acceptably sharp. We refer to depth of field as either shallow, only a small sliver of the photograph front to back is in focus, or deep, meaning that most of the image front to the back is in focus. And so here is a visual example of that. This first photo has a smaller, wide open, smaller number, but wide open aperture. So the depth of field is shallow. So this Sam Adams bottle is in focus, but what's behind it is blurry. And then when we shut down, shut down the opening in the aperture, so an aperture of f22 means that almost everything in range there is in focus. So where that's important is when doing portraits, you're going to want to probably shoot with a shallow depth of field, meaning that your portrait subject is what's in focus and everything else behind it is blurry, not really important. But if, say, you're doing landscape photography and you want everything in focus, then you want that aperture to be a higher number and smaller. So now let's move into shutter speed. The third part of that exposure triangle. It refers to the amount of time that the shutter stays open and allows light to pass through. And this is important because shutter speed will determine how much motion is shown in the photograph. So let's say you're photographing that runner at 1/10 of a second. The runner that will be seen as a blur across your frame. However, at 1/1000th of a second, you won't have any motion at all. You're going to catch that runner mid-stride, frozen in mid-stride. And I personally love those photographs, especially in sports where you you say you get a swimmer coming out of the water in the butterfly, or a soccer player just about to kick that ball. Fast shutter speeds are used to stop motion and will freeze the subject. And slow shutter speeds can be used to portray movement or speed. I love the creative choice here of this, because obviously the shutter speed is slow, but the camera is still enough to and the other things in the photograph are still enough so that they are still while the thing in motion is causing the blur. So it can be a creative choice. Sometimes it's not a creative choice, and that's what I'm noting here. Just remember that when you are in low light situations, in some automatic modes on the camera, that if your shutter is decreasing, your chances of getting a blurry image increase, because you either need to hold the camera steady, or the people who are moving need to be held steady for there not to be blur in those low light situations. So white balance. This is refers to the color cast of light, and it's rated in degrees of Kelvin, so that every temperature has a color associated with it. And these range from cool colors to warm, from cool to warm. Most digital cameras have an automatic white balance, and most cameras do a pretty good job of compensating for that balance. White balance addresses the differences in color of light and allows adjustments to your image to compensate for these shifts. It's good to adjust when you're using flash. It's good to adjust your white balance and in darker settings, but it generally does work well in auto mode. So white balance affects the appearance of colors in your image. And I'll show you an example of that later. I have an example in when I'm trying to explain even light to you and open shade. And you can see in that image that it's not actually in perfect white balance. And I'll show you that there's actually a little bit of green cast because of the grass that was in that photograph. I'll point it out to you. Different light sources cast their own colors, which often can't be noticed with the naked eye. So white balance is essentially the camera compensating for the color cast of the light in order to produce correct colors. So here are some of you may have seen these in your camera: tungsten, fluorescent, flash, cloudy, shade, and daylight. And these are the degrees and the colors associated with them. So you see higher degree Kelvin means a warmer temperature in color. Basic in-camera settings. Scene modes are basically fully automatic modes, and you find these in your compact cameras. You also find them in the bridge cameras. And those are like the little pictures that you see: portrait mode, night mode, beach/snow mode, fireworks macro, etc. They typically place emphasis on one or more settings based on the typical circumstances of the situation that you're choosing. And most digital cameras have very similar scene modes available to you. What I would say is to consult your manual with your camera to understand what each of those pictures might mean. This for the DSLR and the bridge camera also has these as well, and the mirrorless cameras. You will see these. I'm just using Canon and Nikon here, but you have AV or A mode. This means aperture priority, and what this allows you to do is you choose the aperture. So say you want to do that portrait and you want a shallower depth of field, you can choose that wide open aperture, and the camera will then make all of the other decisions for you so that you don't have to do that. In TV or S mode, this is shutter priority, and where you might want to use this is, say, at that sports game that you're shooting, you want to catch the action, frozen action. So you're going to choose a high shutter speed, and the camera is going to make the other decisions for you to properly expose the image. Manual gives you complete control. You choose the shutter speed, you choose the aperture. You can set your camera to automatic ISO, but you can also choose your own ISO. In program mode, now that's very similar to automatic mode, but you are able to set your ISO in that mode as well. So what makes a good photo? Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a photo that my husband took of himself in the next image, and I'm going to show you this to illustrate a point. One of the things that makes a good photo is one of the basic things is taking your time to actually look before you take the photo, and I'll give you an example of this. So here's my husband, and he recently put this photo up on social media. He was showing everybody the beard that he is growing during the pandemic, that he says he is going to, while he's working at home, he's going to keep growing until he returns to work. So he got a lot of comments about the beard, but he also got a lot of comments about something else. And I'm wondering if you can guess what that is by looking at the photo. He got a lot of comments about this. While it made for some funny comments about the halo above his head, he had not noticed that when he took the photo, and he could have moved himself and taken it from a different angle if he hadn't wanted that. He loves a good joke, so I'm sure he's quite okay with the fact that this is how it turned out. But if you were taking this photo of him, for example, you would probably want to, either you would move, like say this, so this is taking the photo, would be taking the photo from head on. You would want to maybe move to a different angle so that that wasn't showing up as a halo above his head, or actually move him to a different part of the room. Another example is, this happens a lot. You'll take a photo of someone and you don't notice that there's a pole right behind them. It looks like it's coming right out of their head, or a tree, same thing. So in taking our time and in looking around before you take the photo, light is super important. I would encourage you to take your time and understand where your light source is coming from. Try to look at where the shadows are, and what you want to do, especially when taking a photo of a person, is to find even lighting, because proper exposure of a person's skin is really difficult, and their person is difficult in disparate light. Seek open shade, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Don't face your subjects to the sun. And also another tip, if you're gonna purposefully take photos, some of the best light is an hour after the sun rises and an hour before it sets. So here's dappled light versus open shade. This is my part of my backyard, and I stood up on the deck so you could see the lighting conditions here and where I'll show you where I placed her. In this first photo here, it's pretty good around the face, but you see that dappled light is blowing out her chest here, blowing out a big part of the background there. Starting to get kind of an uneven and harsh shadows here along this side of the space. And I photographed her, I think probably stood her right about here, right in here, right in here. So what I did was move her. So her back was facing to the fence here, and I turned her this way, and so her back was facing this way, and I took this photo. Now, this is a much more even light to her. What I want you to notice here, and I spoke about it earlier, is the white balance, which I was not paying attention to, and I didn't really correct for in post editing here. And you see a little bit, if you look close, you can see there's a little bit of the green cast from the grass that's reflecting and having an effect on the overall skin tone there. I mean, I'm being really super picky there, but that is happening, and that's an example of white balance that you might not catch with the naked eye. So also want you to, with natural light, not be afraid to go slightly inside. Let me go back to the previous. Trying to go previous. There we go. Go back to this, because what this is called right here, you see the shade that's here, that is open shade. And that's often, you know, people tend to want to, when I go to photograph people, they tend to say, oh, look at all the sunlight. This is really good light here. They think that that might be the ideal light setting, but it's often not. Searching for open shade is what you want, where there's lots of light around, but it's even. So here's another example of placing somebody in an open shade situation. So here's my messy garage, and I have my daughter stand, I want to say like right about here, and I took this photo of her. Now I used a shallow depth of field so that you would not be able to really see a lot of her background there. And look at that. This is this gorgeous light coming in there. That front light with it, actually it's darkened out the background there. It's just something that just to think about, that you can do that. Also, you can do that in a doorway. So this is her close up in that doorway. Again, you see that green door, and you see a little bit of that. Me being picky again here, but of the white balance. So here is facing my daughter into the direct sunlight, and you see how harsh the shadows are on her, and how easy it is to blow out the light on her features. All I did was, this is in front of our house, all I did was turn her around so that her back was to the sunlight, and here's what we got. Same settings. So I would encourage you to look and to do that, like turn somebody away from the sunlight instead of, especially when the light is harsh like that. Take a look before you take the photo. You can see this on them. Okay, so the next, I do want to share another YouTube video with you about composition. And the reason I want to is because, first of all, I love this video. It's, the photography in it is beautiful. It's inspiring, and it encourages you to begin to see things and compose your photos that way. So let's take a look at that.
and photograph your own way becomes
I just love that video. It's on the COOPH YouTube channel. It features the work of Steve McCurry. He's done a lot of work for National Geographic, and just the colors that he uses and the way he sees, it's beautiful. Hope that inspires you too. So here's some more ideas for composition. Negative space, utilizing negative space. This is one of my favorites. These are stock images. And I'll show you an image that I took that utilizes negative space of this little girl. I love negative space. I love the simplicity of it. I love the emotion of it. For me, it can be a breath of fresh air, or it can show isolation or sometimes loneliness, or the vastness of something. You know, if you were to take a photo, if you were say somebody sitting on observing the Grand Canyon, and you were to pull back and you see how tiny that person is in conjunction to the Grand Canyon, that could be a really powerful photo. I love negative space. So also shooting from different angles, and these are two more stock images, shooting flowers from underneath there, and shooting this cute little puppy from above. Recently, I saw this flower blooming out of brick. I became very fascinated with it. And here's just two of the images that I shot. I shot this thing from every angle, and I also shot at a really wide open aperture, as you can see, because I've isolated the back of the image to be in focus, because it's pretty wide open. You see in the front here, it's not in focus, and the difference here being that the way I focus this is the front of the image, and then as you go down, the depth of field drops off there. So that's just, you know, looking at something from a bunch of different angles, moving yourself, getting lower on the ground, getting higher up, taking a bunch of photos. Don't be afraid to do that. Thank goodness for digital, we can do that. More ideas for composition is going in and tighter and getting some of the details in a room. I did a very similar thing to this stock photo when I took images for a friend for their child's 3rd birthday party. In addition to the portraits that I took some of the room. The parents had worked really hard on this circus theme and carnival theme, and I knew that they had wanted to create an album around it. So these details can add color and variety and help tell the story of the day and pay homage to all the hard work that the parents put in. A few more things. So the quality setting of your photos. What this means is, in some cameras, that you can set the quality of your photo to JPEG or TIFF or RAW images. A RAW image is going to be a lot of information, and photographers sometimes like to take photos in RAW because you can edit that photo without degrading the quality of the image a lot. But what I would encourage you to do is, again, consult that manual, or look it up on the internet about how to do this in your camera. But I would put it to the highest quality JPEG that you're able to work with in your camera. You're going to be able to put more images on that memory card, and be able to sift through a lot of tries and a lot of practice on that memory card. Editing, editing's awesome and fun, and obviously I don't go into that a lot here in this class, but because you could do many classes on editing. I encourage you to seek out online classes, in-person classes when we're able to do that again, but online classes on how to edit in Photoshop and Lightroom, and there are classes out there for a couple of other edits, more basic editing software. And I just encourage you to do that. It's fun. It's fun to play around with. Back up your photos. I back up all of my photos in a couple of different places, but one of the places I do, I also put it on an external hard drive. And I have one of these for every year. And I just encourage you to do that. Also pay attention to dust reduction with your lens, even the cameras that have fixed lenses, or even the lens on your phone. So to take a soft cloth that you would use for cleaning your glasses, and to make sure that you clean that lens on your camera. Now also the sensor in your camera should be cleaned, and if you're going to invest in all of that expensive equipment, if you find yourself doing that, I encourage you to make sure that you maintain it and take it to someone who will do that a really good cleaning of that camera for you and those lenses for you. They will also calibrate your lenses to your camera. Some cameras have a mode that you can clean the sensor. It does a sensor cleaning on its own. Read your manual and figure out how to do that. And then lastly, I want to talk to you about doing some photo projects, because they're a fun way to practice and to help you to slow down and really purposefully make a photograph. Here's a few ideas. So you can do some self-portraits. This is a photographer by the name of Vivian Mayer. And she was discovered actually after she died. She did a lot of beautiful self-portraits and a lot of really fascinating street photography. This photo project is something I used to do with my daughter. It's also a fun one. It's can be done out. It's a great outdoor activity, going and looking for objects that mimic and look like letters. Go through the whole alphabet, challenge yourself to do that. You can look for symmetry, begin looking for symmetry and taking and making the photograph. And then something fun like that. I love this idea of playing with clouds. You've seen those photos where people are holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or they're, they're at an angle where they're holding the Washington Monument, or whatever the monument is, between their two fingers. So yeah, those are a few photo project ideas. Also, you can Google photo project ideas, and you'll get many blog posts and articles and things that come up with any number of ideas that you can go out and practice taking and making photos. So if you have any questions about any of the things that I've talked about here, I've covered a lot and I've done it quickly. Please do contact me at my email address, which is lisa@lisanovitskyphoto.com. And be sure to put in the subject line library class, so I have a context for the email, and I will definitely, as I'm searching through the number of emails that I get, make sure I get to those. If I can't answer your question, I will point you in the direction and to a source that I think will answer the question for you. So let me get out of the shared screen and just come back on. So thanks so much for being here, and I do hope that some of this information was helpful to you, and that it encourages you to delve deeper into some of these subjects and to keep pursuing your photography education. Do contact me. I look forward to hearing from some of you, and have a great afternoon or morning or evening or whenever it is that you're watching this. All the best wishes for you. Thanks.